Russian President Vladimir Putin over the weekend declares destruction on Ukraine after the Kazan drone attack. And for those who may not be aware, what he's referring to in that drone attack was some actually very emotional video footage. Certainly elicited a lot of thoughts for American audiences when Ukrainian drones, two separate drone attacks, hit a tall high-rise office building or a hotel or apartment building in the city of Kazan over the weekend, which is interesting because that's also where the BRICS meeting was. So I think that was probably attacked for a bigger reason than that. But what Putin actually said was, you could see, actually, we have a video clip of it where he's actually quite emotional and emphatic about what he plans to do in response.
Whoever and however much they try to destroy in Russia, they will face many times more destruction themselves and will regret what they are trying to do in our country.
And again, because this is starting to be a big issue for the Russian people, where they continue to see these kinds of images, and they're wondering, what is our government going to do in response? So that's just adding additional pressure on Putin to do something. And as we've been talking about in some of our recent shows, it's a little unclear why the Russians have been continuing to maintain the same pace on the front lines, especially in the Donbass area, in the Pokrovsk front specifically, and definitely in the Kursk area in the north. They're making methodical progress, and they continue to do so. Every time we talk to you, we show you the map typically, and you can see on there that there is progress literally every single day, but it is also relatively small. Some days it's big. Some days there's 2 or 3 kilometers here and there. Some days it's not that much. Some days it's less. But in aggregate, it continues to grow up. But here's the problem from the Russian perspective, is that these things could literally take months more to go. As I've shown you from the map a number of times, that it's important for Russia, if they take the Pokrovsk area, or the city of Pokrovsk specifically, then that puts a lot of the Western front, the Eastern Front, at risk, and then the next targets will probably be Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and those are important because once those three, Pokrovsk, Slavyansk, and Kramatorsk, once those are taken, there's almost nothing behind it. There's almost no defense fortifications, at least nothing that's of this complexity and depth with which these current ones are built. And but the problem for Russia, it could take a long time to get through that. So it's unclear what Putin's negotiating position is, because with everything coming in from Trump is that he's talking about he's looking forward to having a negotiated settlement. He's looking forward to meeting Vladimir Putin. He continues to make statements like this again, even over the weekend. And Putin is saying that he's willing to talk to him, but it's unclear what Putin's negotiating strategy is. There is one that says he'll just continue to go methodically forward, entertain Trump and see what he has to say. And then if he doesn't get a deal he wants, he just lets his military continue to go on. There is a different school of thought that says, well, when you get into negotiations, we want to increase the pressure and increase the pain so that there's motivation on the other side to come up with a negotiated settlement. Absent that, this could literally drag on for many more months. Unfortunately, the biggest bill pay for that is going to be the Ukrainian people, but it's also not going to be cost-free on the Russian side, because continuing to maintain this process that they've been undergoing, whatever the actual casualty numbers are, by every account, even Russian accounts, it's quite high, and that will continue to see that daily number go higher, because there's no evidence so far that Trump's going to come in and just lay down and just say, sure, whatever you say, Vlad, we're going to go ahead and give that to you as long as the war's over, next week or something to that effect. So Trump, being who he is going to do everything he can to come out with a PR win. He's going to want to look like he was strong, that he, wrestled some concessions out of Putin, et cetera. Putin is not going to be in any mood, I don't think, to give in on something. He's certainly not going to give in on something quick. He's got his own reasons for having, have a public relations victory of his own. He'll also want to come out looking strong. But his biggest issue for the Russian people, especially in his electorate, is that what's true on the ground has to be paramount. Now, interestingly enough, Volodymyr Zelensky has been trying to put a good face on a lot of this. But one of the things that he says, it's just kind of in contradiction to what Trump has been implying anyway, is that he said, I reject a current frontline freeze. I don't want anything to stop this. I don't want the war to be frozen here. I want something back. But here's the problem. What do you think you're going to get by saying to publicly, we're against freezing the situation here? Now, plausibly, Russia's not interested in a freeze either, because then that would actually limit their negotiating power. So I doubt that they would go for a freeze, because now then, absent that pressure, then the negotiations could literally go on for a long, long time. But it's interesting that Zelensky himself says he's not interested in a freeze, because of the two sides. I assure you that a freeze would help Ukraine like 10 times more than it would help Russia. Russia can benefit as well in retooling its military, getting, vital needed rest for their troops, etc. But nobody needs that more than the Ukraine side does, because while the Russians could certainly use some rest and refit, they are moving forward. Ukraine, on the other hand, is moving backward, and they don't have enough troops to do that. If you have a freeze, if you have, like, say, a ceasefire and then negotiations start, then the killing stops on the Ukraine side. Now then, whatever they're doing with forced mobilization actually starts to actually grow, and it's a net positive for the Ukraine side. So given that reality, it seems pretty unlikely to me that Russia's going to approve it. But then the question has to be, for the Zelensky perspective, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you think by making these statements? And there's been several others here in just even the last few days where he's been pretty adamant about saying some things that are coming close to being insulting for the Trump side, when he's responding to some things that Trump is saying here. But at some point, you have to acknowledge just what exists, the actual ground truth reality. Everything that I've described is going on, moving backward for the Ukraine side. They don't have enough manpower. Even if they force mobilize them, they just don't have enough to continue to make these moves. So it's unclear where is Zelensky going, because I don't know. It could be he's just detached from reality. We use that phrase a lot, but it could be actually true that in his mind, he thinks, no, if I can only fill in the blank, who knows what the blank would be. If I can only do this or get that, then we're going to keep our land, or then we'll set up the stage. He did say at one point, I want to have a provision that says, we'll get our stuff back in diplomacy later, all of our territories, get them back. Folks, that's just outright fantasy. No, what country in the history of mankind, and we're talking thousands of years of conflict history, what nation ever won a military success and then allowed it to just be diplomatically handed back to the other side when they had the power, when they were on the ascendancy militarily? It's never happened, and it never will happen. No one is going to just hand over something that they fought for. It just doesn't happen that way. We see that throughout human history. But you keep seeing that over and over. And in fact, Trump himself has said that he is, he's looking forward to having negotiations. So there's some headlines out here in the last couple of days that he claims that Putin himself is looking forward to meeting him and having some negotiations. Interestingly enough, those claims are being refuted by the Kremlin. They're saying, yeah, actually, we don't have anything scheduled on the books. They actually claim they haven't talked to him at all, even though Trump implied strongly in a previous interview that he had. But then you go into the others who actually do view things more realistically. We show you a lot of people, whether it's the new Secretary General of NATO, whether it's Keir Starmer, who I think over the weekend was again out there saying we have to keep going. Ukraine has to succeed, which is just bizarre. If Zelensky is detached from reality with his wanting to get territory back by negotiations after the side that wins is just going to give it back to him. Keir Starmer talking about we can't let Ukraine win, can't let Ukraine lose, is a little bit more detached from reality. But some people aren't detached from reality, and they've been in the headlines a bit over the months. But now then, Viktor Orban is again stepping back in, because he is again, as recently as yesterday or a day before yesterday, said, listen, we have to change our strategy. This is the Washington Post reporting this, so this is actually getting a little bit of traction. He said, we cannot just continue on with what we're doing. Obviously, he sees the same thing that we do, and he recognizes it. He probably has more knowledge even than we do, because he has access to his intelligence services and the like, and probably talks to many other heads of state. And he's saying what's just should be self-evident. You can't keep going down this path. It can't lead anywhere. And he again reiterated, look, let's at least have a Christmas ceasefire. At least let's just stop the killing for a little while. Then maybe you can start some negotiations. Of course, Putin has said he would consider a temporary ceasefire. And listen, folks, right at this point, even though that probably wouldn't lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities, because then that would literally be a freezing of the conflict, but at least it can stop the killing for a period of time, save Ukrainian lives, and give people a chance to catch their breath and actually maybe come back to reality. But Viktor Orban's not the only one. As a matter of fact, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, also says that, look, it's time to end this war. Now, he has a little bit bigger issue. And by the way, if you hadn't seen this yet, that's kind of big news to a lot of people. He didn't just talk to Putin. He went to Moscow. I'm pretty sure that's the first time that's happened since the war broke out, that the head of state, other than Viktor Orban, went to go and meet in Moscow Vladimir Putin. Now, this is because of a dispute, not with Moscow, but with Ukraine, because there are some gas lines that transit through Ukraine from Russia, and this is hard to believe by many people today, still don't even know. To this day, there is still gas transiting from Russia through Ukraine into parts of Europe. I don't know if you're aware of that. It seems like there's no way that isn't happening. Well, actually, it is. But here's the problem. Because Zelensky has a problem with Fico and his position to try and reach a negotiated settlement. He's claiming that very early in the next year, he's going to stop allowing Russian gas to transit into his country. And in response, Fico said, Gary, if you can put that call out back up again, this is why Fico said that he even made the visit anyway. He said, my meeting today was a response to the statement of the president of Ukraine, who answered my personal question on Thursday that he opposes any gas transit through Ukraine to our territory. Similarly, the Ukrainian president is in favor of sanctions against Russia's nuclear program. With this position, he is causing financial damage to Slovakia. So he is now putting national interest above European interest. Now, of course, he's been saying for almost a duration that the war is foolish, because he also concludes that it is unwinnable for the Ukraine side, that supporting it from the European side is foolish and nothing but a money pit, and just throwing cash into a burning pit where it can't do anything except be lost. And now then he's been threatened with, no, you're not going to get cheap gas. Interestingly enough, Hungary and Orban, they had a different agreement, and for some reason, Ukraine is allowing gas to transit through their country to go to Hungary, but now then they don't want to let it go through to Fico. When in that statement there, when Prime Minister Fico was talking about the nuclear material, the Russians helped build a lot of the nuclear power plants in Slovakia, and so they have to operate them. They have to bring fuel into it. They have to maintain them, etc. And if relations are broken, then of course that stops. Now then, that could potentially cause taking offline some of the nuclear power that Slovakia relies upon. So he's saying, okay, I think it's dumb that we're trying to pretend like Ukraine can win the war, but where I'm not just going to roll my eyes, but I'm going to make a hard, fast no, is when it causes a financial harm to my country. And listen, if you want to really start getting to playing with that, you can make a bigger case for Germany. They are actually in a worse position economically because of all the sanctions and everything else that they've supposed, not the least of which was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was destroyed early in the conflict. And one wonders how long the Germans will go knowing that they are facing financial hardship and difficulty, because now, even though they have replaced the supply of the cheap Russian natural gas, they have not replaced its cheapness, because now then their industry has to pay a lot higher price for that. And that is in no small part responsible for the significant deterioration in their economic performance. It stands to reason, if you paid X dollars per unit of natural gas from Russia, which was coming in via pipeline, and now all of a sudden you have to pay like X 5X or something, or whatever the actual number is, a lot more for the inputs coming from elsewhere, usually from liquefied natural gas. then obviously your operating costs are going to go up, and either your prices are going to go up to your customers, or you're going to take a hit on the profits, or you're going to take a loss, one or the other. All of it's bad from economic production perspective. So we'll have to see what they're interested in doing on that. But so we talked a little bit about what Zelensky doesn't want for negotiations. Trump has been a little bit more vague on what he does want, but Vladimir Putin just a few days ago talked about what he would view as the preconditions for negotiations.
We don't have any preconditions for talks. We are ready to engage in a conversation without preconditions, but there has to be a basis of something that we've agreed upon during the talks in Istanbul in late 2022, and based, of course, on the realities on the ground at this moment.
So, we can go back and relook again at what he's talking about at the April 2022 deal in Istanbul that initially came out, seemed like it was a good basis that both sides seemed to agree to coming out. And then for all the reasons we know, that was sabotaged by the Western side. And then all of a sudden, Zelensky turned against it, never to return to it. In fact, to this day, there is still a law on the books that Zelensky himself brought to the table to make sure that his parliament put in place, that he then signed, which said it's actually illegal for him to negotiate with Russia as long as Vladimir Putin is in the Kremlin. So it's interesting that we talked to you last week about Putin saying, hey, look, I don't even have a negotiating partner right now, because who am I going to sign a deal with? Somebody that's not even legal, because Zelensky went way past his expiry of a term of office, and there's not even a plan at the moment to have another election. So he's wondering who's he going to be talking to. Well, it's interesting because on the other side, on the Zelensky side, Zelensky made his own law that prohibits him from talking to Putin. So it's unclear how that's going to even transpire. Somehow he's got to either undo that law or just blow it off, I guess. I guess anything's possible right now. And that's evidence of some other things that continue to go on within Ukraine. We've showed you videos of how a lot of the Ukrainian men are being literally grabbed off the street. It's a routine thing. It's happening all over the country to thrust them into war. We've talked about the tremendous desertion rate, not surprisingly at all, that goes along with that. And now it seems like that their government is taking yet another step. Now, we use on this channel several times, we highlight the work of Military Summary Channel, because they're one of the best mappers. And one of the ways that they get their maps is that they also look at numerous other mapping outfits, independent mapping outfits, pro-Ukraine side, pro-Russian side, possibly even the ISW, I'm not sure. But he has a conglomeration through all these sources, and then he comes up with his own map, which we talk about. It's been very accurate over time. One of his key sources was the Deep State. It's called Deep State. It's a map from it's a mapping organization that's from Ukraine. It's pro-Ukraine, but it's also accurate and honest. And now then it's being reported that Deep State has been taken offline by the Ukrainian government. And one of the ways that they're doing that apparently is they're going to force mobilize the guys who run it and force them to go and fight in the war. And now as a result, for the last 2 or 3 days, they have not been providing any updates. According to some of the posts on X, that's because the commander-in-chief Syrskyi wants to shut it down. They don't want the truth coming out, because it's one thing, they don't have any influence over over the Military Summary or Weeb Union, which we also cite sometimes. But the Ukrainian people, of course, are going to be looking first and foremost to a Ukrainian source. And when you look at the map, you just can't get around it. You're losing everywhere you go. Now then there's continued deterioration in the Pokrovsk area again today, like there is virtually every day. In the Kupiansk area, there's continued shrinking of the remaining space in the Kursk area. Now then there's even been some additional movement here in the last couple of days over the weekend in the Kharkov area up in the north. That's been kind of dormant for a while, but now apparently Russian side has made some advances there, and down in the Kherson area in the south, where there's reports that there are additional troops that are being Russian troops that are taking more and more action down there. And apparently there's been some territorial acquisitions, which hasn't happened down there in quite a long time. And apparently the Ukrainian government doesn't want its people to know about that. Now, listen, I mean, I keep asking the same question on so many topics. Towards what end? Do you think that you can lie to your people and then blind them so they can't see it on the ground, and then you keep saying happy things when it never materializes on the ground? Here's an inescapable reality. No one has to accept this. Doesn't matter if you can concede to it. It doesn't matter. Your personal opinions on this are irrelevant. When the ground truth is starting to eat your country and your men continue to die in large numbers, you don't have an industrial base that can ever recover from the loss it is. It can't compete with the Russian side. Your personnel can never compete with the Russian side. Remember, Ukraine is doing forced mobilizations, and that's not enough to offset the losses, so their army continues to shrink, whereas on the Russian side, they continue to recruit, reportedly around 30,000 per month. What that tells you is that it's not to the point Russia could get to the point to where it just says, hey, if they're ever, suffering casualties at too high a rate, they can just put martial law into effect and then force mobilize people, like Ukraine did for the longest time successfully. Like the first year and a half or so, they had, the laws where they mobilized people and they just went in. It wasn't that big of a problem. They didn't have to grab them off the streets. They were willing to go in until things got really bad, and we know where it is now. Russia, other than that first mobilization of 300,000 in October, I believe it was, of 2022, from that time, they've just been able to meet their needs with recruitment, having lots of money, give them bonuses, all that kind of stuff. It's worked. But if push comes to shove, they could literally just order 1 million people into uniform, people who've been in uniform before, who've been in reserves, etc. So there will never be a shortage of manpower for Russia. It is an existential threat to the Russian side. And yes, there is some financial wobbliness going on. Their inflation is starting to get really high. There's some concerns in Russia without question. But folks, you can ride that kind of stuff out for years. If anybody has this fantasy that that's going to cause the Russian side to fall apart and somehow Ukraine can win, all you're doing is increasing the cost of failure to the Ukraine side. There's not. Just get it out of your head. There is no path. And then that's, again, the reason why I'm asking, what is in the minds of their commander, Syrskyi? What is in the mind of Zelensky when they keep pushing against everything, whether it's Orban saying, let's have a Christmas ceasefire, whether it's Trump saying, let's have a negotiation and we'll try to get you the best deal you can. He rejects it all. Zelensky does. Syrskyi does. They keep fighting. They keep now talking about lowering the recruiting age to 18. Apparently, there's an exodus from the country of women with their children and their young boys, especially because they are terrified that they're going to end up being sent into this meat grinder, this almost suicidal mission. It's just unbelievable that they're willing to continue to sacrifice their people, and there is just no path. So at some point, if they don't concede to reality, the only thing left, folks, is a military conquest by Russia. And given how long it's taken Russia to get to this point, it could still be a number of months. But as I pointed out to you, and it's important to understand this, even if it takes them months to get through Pokrovsk, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and that agglomeration there, once they do that, there's just nothing on the other side of that would make it hard for Russia to pick up steam, and then they could continue going on to the Dnieper River, perhaps, and then if there's still no capitulation, still no deal, then Russia could, if they needed to, could mobilize more people. They could just continue build up. Allegedly, there's hundreds of thousands of troops that aren't even in contact yet, and then they could perhaps invest in some of these major cities or surround them, cut them off, etc. All kinds of bad things. There's just no path for the Ukraine side to avoid, the total immolation of its population. They've got to have to stop and do what makes sense, or they're just going to pay the ultimate price. And it is anguishing to watch, and especially here as we're just about to close in on Christmas. It's been a tradition and many times in the past, throughout wars of the century, decades and centuries of the past, to at least have, a respite on Christmas. And even though that seems like a small thing, it's something big to people who may not ever see another Christmas. And I hope that such a Christmas miracle happens. I hope that somehow Zelensky changes his mind for the sake of his countrymen and the sake of his country, and at least have peace on earth in Ukraine for 24 hours, for 12 hours, something like that, so that nobody has to die on that day. And maybe with that kind of an opening, eyes can pop up open in other areas, and they can realize some of the things that we're talking about here. And it won't just be Viktor Orban and Robert Fico or Donald Trump that recognize this is not a winnable situation. But as long as we have the Keir Starmers and the Schultz and the Macrons that are willing to blindly just keep saying, sure, here's more stuff, go kill yourselves, then this could get even more ugly than it is. We'll continue to watch this for you. We're going to track this all the way through, folks. Whether something does or doesn't happen on Christmas, we'll be letting you know. But in the meantime, we appreciate you watching today. I know it's getting close to Christmas time. A lot of people have different things to do. We value you very much. Appreciate you watching. You can count on Gary and I to continue to bring you whatever information happens whenever it happens. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.